Alrighty, here we go again. My name is Curt Kallenbaugh, and I am putting together what I'm going to call Season of Treason 2, The Players. I think that's the best way to do this. What I want to do today is I want to differentiate, for those of you that are wondering about that have watched Season of Treason, a lot of people don't understand that there is no politics, there are no teams. This whole thing is a fiction. And what I want to do today is actually differentiate America from the District of Columbia from the United States. You can already see that I've drawn it out on a board because I'm not an artist, but I wanted to get this stuff done in advance. But you can see this is America, this is the District of Columbia, and here's the United States. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is try to get it so people understand what we're dealing with here. I mean, this is a cancer, and nobody understands the problem. So there's no possible way that we can terminate this cancer. So my job today, if I can do it, is to explain those differences. So those that are consider themselves patriots can understand this stuff, so we can get out of it. We need to terminate this stuff. So here we go. Let's start with America. This landmass is America. America's about 3.5 million square miles. You can see the outline. This is not counting Hawaii, obviously, or Alaska up here. But most people confuse this landmass with the United States. This landmass has been basically here forever. Those of you that believe in Pangea and all that stuff, it doesn't matter, because just because this is the outline doesn't mean that it hasn't always been here. So when in 1492, when a man named Columbus supposedly sailed the ocean blue, sadly most people don't know who Christopher Columbus actually was, and most people don't know where he was from. There's enough evidence to show that he was from Italy. There's evidence to show he was from Spain, but there's a ton of evidence to show that he was from Greece. So we really don't know the truth about Christopher Columbus, which is kind of interesting to me, since he supposedly is the one that discovered America. You know what's interesting about that discovery too is that there was already 10 to 12 million Native Americans living on this soil. So I don't know how anybody can say that he discovered it, with the exception of maybe they need to call it a discovery so somebody can lay claim to it, like maybe England or maybe the Vatican, something like that. So there was already 10 to 12 million inhabitants upon this soil. So there was no discovery. What's interesting also is that within 400 years of 1492, that indigenous population, the Native Americans, went from 10 to 12 million down to about 250,000. So whoever discovered America murdered 95% of the people that were already living here. I would say that there's a problem with that. What else about America? Oh, America. It has no bodies politic, no religious bodies, and it also has no corporate bodies, which means there's no government, there's no business, and there's no church on American soil. There isn't. Not on American soil. Let's see what other tidbits. 1790. In 1790, in America, there were about 4 million inhabitants from about 12 countries. The latest census, I believe the 2010 census, had about 311 million inhabitants. That's men, women, and children, from about, I believe, 47 different cultures, or I don't like using countries, but about 47 different cultures. That is the makeup of America. So what is America? America is land and people. That's it. That's what America is. It's hardworking people that have an individual nature that want to do things for themselves. That's America. And America is whatever those people decide it should be. That's America. So let's get to the District of Columbia. What is the District of Columbia? Well, the District of Columbia is an island foreign to America. It's an island that sits in the northeast, basically, and it has, in fact, let's just back up a second. That island is completely foreign to America, the American people, and basically the laws of the land, God's law. It's an island separate from everything you can imagine. It was established by the Organic Act of 1871. I'm talking about this District of Columbia. This District of Columbia. Not way back when. I'm talking about the one that we're living under currently. It was established in 1871 by the Organic Act. And here's what's interesting about it. The 43rd Congress that created this District of Columbia, they were unlawful. They were not even a true Congress, a lawful Congress, because, remember, the Constitution disappeared in 1861 when the southern states left. The Congress that was left in place was basically a criminal Congress that was acting anti or contrary to the Constitution. Whether you like the Constitution or not is irrelevant. The fact is that this 43rd Congress was not a lawful Congress. So we got to remember that. And so through Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, that Congress established this District of Columbia. That new District of Columbia is a private municipal corporation. And it's completely controlled by a legislature. Completely, 100% completely controlled by a legislature. This District of Columbia, established 1871, has, if you actually look up the Organic Act, one of the last lines in it actually says that it has, I got to make sure I word this right, but I'm paraphrasing, but it says it has powers not inconsistent with the Constitution and laws of the United States. So this District of Columbia, the 43rd Congress, gave this District of Columbia powers consistent with the Constitution. It's a 10-mile square between Maryland and Virginia. Today it probably takes up, it's somewhere between 68 and 70 square miles actually today. Somewhere in the mid-1850s or something, they got rid of some of the land. There's no reason to go into that here. Here's what's also interesting. This District of Columbia is legally considered the state. And it has been since an act of that unlawful Congress in 1864. So whenever you talk about the state, you're not talking about Illinois, you're not talking about Wisconsin, you're not talking about Arizona, you're not talking about Florida, you're not talking about anything. This is the state. Officially. Now let's stick on that for just a minute. Officially, its name is called the State of New Columbia. The State of New Columbia. And it has had its own constitution since 1982. So it was established in 1871, but it got its own constitution in 1982. It's considered a city-state, just like the old Roman or Greek city-states. It's one of 3 city-states in the world. It has its own laws, its own rule book, it follows nothing, it doesn't have anything to do with America, it can do what it wants. And it does, believe me, it does. The other 2 city-states, So this is the state of New Columbia. The other two city-states most of us have heard of, and that's the city of London and Vatican City. You know what's an interesting thought is the city of London, where the Bank of England is, and where the crown, not the monarchy, but the crown of England actually is, which is the monetary world capital. Of course, we know what the Vatican is the so-called spiritual world capital. And what is this? What is the District of Columbia? It's the military. It's the military capital. They don't call it the military-industrial complex for nothing. It really is exactly that. What else should I cover here real quick? Oh, the community. The community within the District of Columbia is considered the public. So when you're in the public, you're actually in the District of Columbia. That's considered the public. Just like if you read the Law of Nations and things like that. The idea of public. I mean, so when you're walking down the street in Illinois, as I've done most of my life, or in Ohio, or in Massachusetts, it doesn't matter where. When you're walking down the street or in the grass, it doesn't matter. You're not in the public. Unless, of course, you're a U.S. citizen. We're going to get into that in a second. So, the boundaries of the District of Columbia is considered the public. And that public, this public here, is ruled by the Roman system called lex fori. Lex fori is the law of the forum. And those within this jurisdiction, the law of the forum, lex fori, they have only civil liberties. We only know them as civil rights, but they have civil liberties. And those liberties, think about the word liberty. Liberty is not freedom. You can look it up in Black's Law, but liberty is not freedom. Somebody has to give you that liberty. Somebody has to say, yes, you can go. In other words, there's somebody over you. They're privileges. Civil rights are privileges. So anybody fighting for their civil rights is an idiot. See, there's a difference between civil rights or privileges and unalienable rights or God's rights. It's totally different. In fact, think about it. Who gives you privileges? Men. Who gave you unalienable rights? God. So, here's one. The legal residents. The legal residents of this public, the legal residents, have 3 electoral college votes. So this state has 3 electoral college votes in what we consider to be a government. 3. It also, the legal residents of the District of Columbia have no congressional representation. 0. So if you're a legal resident of the District of Columbia, you have absolutely no congressional representation. And finally, for the District of Columbia, God's law and unalienable rights do not exist. And so in the state of New Columbia, the District of Columbia, there's no such thing as rights. All there is privileges. So, this little island, the District of Columbia, I should probably make that more to scale. Let's do that. So here's America. Here is D.C. It's a dot. It's a dot. And yet it's called the public. So there it is. There we got this. Let's go over real quick and cover the United States, and then I'm going to show you how we get mixed up in all this stuff. So hopefully we can cover this pretty quick today, because the last time I think I was out in front of anybody, it took about an hour and 45 minutes. The United States. The United States. As you can see, I have it drawn out as a building. The reason I have it drawn as a building is because it's a company. Okay? So let's just put the United States somewhere in the District of Columbia. There it is. U.S. Inc. Hopefully my big board here doesn't mess me up today. So, United States, what is it? Well, the first time I saw it mentioned anywhere was in the Articles of Confederation. Interestingly, it was recognized by the King of France at the Treaty of Paris. Now, what I found interesting about that, the Treaty of Paris, are two things. Number one, it seems to me like the King differentiated the United States from the United States of America. So when if you read the Treaty of Paris, 1783, you will see that the King seems to differentiate the United States from the United States of America. I don't know why. Actually, I do, but... So here we go. The United States has corporate roots, because remember, this is a company, a corporation. The United States has corporate roots in the original charter of the Virginia Land Company of London, which was established in 1606. 1606. So, as far as I'm concerned, the United States, the corporation, really all it was the King recognizing the Virginia Land Company with a new name. The union of those corporate states, which we always forget about, was just him renaming his old 13 colony corporations and putting them under one new heading called the United States. Now, Article 4 of the Treaty of Paris was probably the most interesting one of all to me, because the King says that all earlier contracts, I think he uses the word heretofore. Look it up, it's out there. But the old contracts, or the contracts that were in place prior to the Revolutionary War, were still in place after, and they were still to be honored. So as far as I'm concerned, nothing changed. The Revolutionary War didn't change anything, and the so-called victors, America, still owed all the war debt. So as far as I'm concerned, we're still under the corporate thumb of both the King and the Crown. The United States is a private, for-profit corporation. In other words, it's just a fiction, and it's owned by the Crown, which is the Bank of England within the City of London. So the United States is a private company, no different, and I've said this in the past, it's no different than Walmart. It's no different than McDonald's. And I use that all the time so people can understand that the United States is not a government. It's not a country. It's not even a landmass. It's like a building. It's a building that happens to be within the District of Columbia. This particular company works entirely, it functions entirely in commerce. In fact, all you have to do is look up the UCC, look up the Uniform Commercial Code, and that is what the United States works within. It has a corporate charter, and that corporate charter is actually called, here we go, Mr. Patriot Myth, it's the corporate charter of this company is called the Constitution of the United States. Not to be confused with the 1787-1789 Constitution for the United States. Different. This has its own corporate charter. It was established in 1871. If you want to see it for yourself, in fact, just this past February, this is This is August 2011. Back in March, or actually it was back in February of this year, they renewed their corporate charter by reading it into the record. So all you have to do is look back, go to YouTube or do whatever, but look at their Congress, their legislature, look at their corporate body, read their corporate charter into the record. They have done it every 20 years since 1871. It's a matter of public record. They do it every 20 years. It has the private. This company, the United States, has a private internal monetary system. They have their own form of money, their own currency system. And what they've done is they've contracted with a company called the Federal Reserve. This company has its own private currency. And they've contracted with a company called the Federal Reserve, which is an international company. And it has its own internal currency called the Federal Reserve note. If you want to see what the rule of law says about it is, look up the Clearfield Doctrine. The Clearfield Doctrine will explain that the United States is nothing more than any other business. It's not a sovereign, it's a business. So look up the Clearfield Doctrine. It has its own internal legal system. You know what? McDonald's has its own internal security system and legal system. I mean, if you don't follow their rules, their corporate policy, you're out. Wouldn't that be nice if this were the case? Anyway, the United States has its own corporate policy, and it has its own internal legal system. It's called the Department. It's another department of the private company called the Department of Justice. And that department for the United States was established in 1870. Their Department of Justice has authority over its employees, or those claiming to be claiming allegiance to it. Most people recognize that as a U.S. citizen. So we'll get into that in a second. So the private legal system, the United States private legal system, the Department of Justice, is only for its employees / citizens. It has a private Supreme Court, a corporate Supreme Court within the Department of Justice, it's a body that only works within its private legal system. It has nothing to do with an Article III judiciary. We'll get into that in a second. It has its own private military. The United States has its own contracted military. Sadly, we think that the United States Army, the United States Navy, the United States Air Force, and the Marines, the United States Marines, we think that those guys are fighting for America. No, they're not. They're fighting for corporate profits for this private company owned by the Crown. Has nothing to do with fighting for freedom or trying to keep freedom for America. The American people have been free of any attacks, and always have been. There are no terrorists. It's these people making it look like there's terrorists so they can do what they need to do for more corporate profits. It has a private internal police force. And that police force is actually enforcing, what are they enforcing? The commercial, UCC, the commercial statutory codes that these guys call public policy. These guys create their own public policy that only affects those claiming allegiance to this company. And that would be employees of this company and or citizens claiming allegiance to this particular company. It has private administrative officers acting in courtrooms. What we believe are courtrooms. They're just administrative offices. We go in there. We believe there's a court system. There's not. And in these courtrooms, their private officers are adjudicating basically and ultimately probate / estate issues. That's all. So their property, or what they believe they have legal title over, which is, sadly, the birth certificates of every U.S. citizen. So, but they're adjudicating, they're actually ruling upon, as administrators, the estates of all those U.S. citizens. They're not judges, and it's not law. It's internal, and it's internal to the United States. It has thousands. The United States has thousands of internal departments. And just to name a few of them, I should probably grab my notes. Let's see. Okay, right off the top of my head, Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security is the United States. It's a private department for the United States. It has nothing to do with America. It is purely United States. The FEMA, what is it, Federal Emergency Management, I don't know, is it association or, I don't know what it is, but FEMA is a private United States organization, department. CIA, FBI, Department of Motor Vehicles is strictly United States. It has nothing to do with America or the law of the land. USDA, FDA, EPA, you can keep going. Not NASA. There's a contracted company or a department of the United States. You can go on and on, but anything that's a department, think about a Walmart. They have their departments. They have departments within the company, and they're broken down. They have their own issues, their own legal system. They have all this stuff, just like the United States does. We got to not be confused with the United States and America and the American people. This United States, by the way, let's go back to that. I said it earlier, but this United States has 170 million registered private corporate citizen employees that are subject to the jurisdiction of their corporate policy. 170 million. Well, I said earlier that America has about 311, based on the last census, has about 311 million inhabitants. Well, the United States has 170 million registered private corporate citizens that claim allegiance to this company. Wow, that seems like to me that this is, if there's 170 million claiming allegiance to this out of 311, is that not a majority? And according to the Declaration of Independence, is that not the consent of the governed? Really? These private corporate citizens fall under what's called the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment is part of the private corporate charter called the Constitution of the United States. It is not an amendment as we know it. It is a private corporate amendment for private corporate citizens. That was established in 1868, right after the Reconstruction of the Union States, after America was disassembled and reassembled under the organization called the United States. This United States also, I'm going to try to run all this stuff down because then I'm going to see how it all fits together. It has private. The United States has private corporate franchises called state ofs. The state of Illinois, the state of Wisconsin, the state of Florida, the state of Washington, the state of California. These are all private corporate franchises. They have nothing to do with the union state called Illinois, the union state called Wisconsin, the union state called Florida, the union state called Washington. Not the same thing. The state ofs all fall under the jurisdiction of this private United States. It's just like a McDonald's when they open a new branch. Now, I think the original McDonald's corporate office was in Des Plaines, Illinois. Now there are thousands of McDonald's worldwide, but they all still fall under the authority of the original McDonald's corporate. If you don't follow the rules, you're done. Well, the state of Illinois has to follow the rules of the United States Incorporated. Otherwise, it doesn't get any funding. Well, that's the whole thing. That's the name of the game, is money. You know, how can the state of Illinois function without the blessings of the United States? It can't. So the Union state just backed away because it doesn't exist anymore, because there's no government, because all of its inhabitants, all of its citizenry decided to choose a different path. This company, the United States, contracts with international agencies such as the IRS or the IMF to collect or enforce corporate monetary policy. So those citizens or employees that are using the private Federal Reserve note falls under the jurisdiction and rule book of this company. So it contracts with an outside agency, IRS, to do what? To collect the internal revenue of its private corporate citizens. This is easy stuff, people. This is easy stuff. Another contract besides the IRS is, I'll just put it here, it's the Federal Reserve, the Fed. That's a contract. They contracted with the Fed for their private currency. Their private currency has nothing to do with what we call money. Money. That's gold, silver, things of value. They took all that away in 1933. Everything disappeared when this company took over the reins from the American people. Everything disappeared. All rights disappeared that day. This company here has its own flag. It flies its own flag. And you can see it in their private courtrooms, in their private tribunals, legislative tribunals. It flies a gold flag. The fringe around it, the gold fringe around their flag, signifies the United States Incorporated. It has these very similar. It looks very similar to the American flag, but then again, the American flag wasn't ever a good deal anyway. We need to stop claiming allegiance to this garbage. We need to stop. We need to understand what's going on here and stop. How about this? The term domestic. When you hear domestic, GDP, gross domestic product, what does that mean? It means within the United States. Domestic doesn't mean the American people or America. It means within the United States. It's the productivity of its citizenry, the productivity of its, of the sheeple. It's the productivity of its serfs. So, when they say that we have been domesticated, we're no different than any other livestock. It's just like any other farm. It's just like any other business. They're overseeing their inventory, and we are it. And this is one that I like to draw out too, and then I'm going to explain how we're all attached to this crap. Their internal structure. The United States has an internal structure very similar to the three branches of what most people believe to be the constitutional republic. Let me draw this out real quick. This United States has a board of directors. But it looks very similar to the Article 1 legislature. Their board of directors looks like the Article 1 legislature. In fact, most Americans confuse their board of directors with Congress. There is no Congress there, folks. It's a board of directors, and has been since 1871. This company has a CEO. That looks like the presidency. Now here's what's interesting about that. Just like the president of McDonald's or the president of Walmart, the president of a private for-profit corporation does not fall under the guidelines or the restraints of the Constitution. Therefore, a man with the background as a Barack Obama can be the president of this private company. He can be from Kenya. He can be a Muslim. He can be anything this company wants him to be, because it has nothing to do with government. It's a private company. And here's the worst part of all. If this isn't bad enough, this company has, again, I said it earlier, it has its own internal legal system. And that legal system falls under its CEO. So, it's a department under the CEO called the Department of Justice. It looks like in Article 3, Judiciary. It looks like it. But every aspect of the Department of Justice, it's a department under the President. It is not separate. There is no separation. You got a board of directors for this United States Incorporated. You have a CEO who's the President, and under the control of the President, complete control of the President, is the private legal system called the Department of Justice. What's interesting about this is that almost every American believes that the Department of Justice is a system of law. It's not. It's not. So here we go. Let's see how this all connects. Now that we have it. Hopefully, I haven't mixed anybody up yet. So here we go. We got America, a landmass of about 3.5 million square miles. With people, physical, flesh and blood, men, women, and children, inhabiting the soil. We have the District of Columbia, which is a 10-mile square between Maryland and Virginia. It's a separate entity. It's an international island. It is foreign to America. And then within this 10-mile square, you have a private company on the soil of the District of Columbia. So what did I say earlier? This has its own civil Roman system called Lex Fori. That's what this has. This has its own private Department of Justice that falls under complete commercial, it's a completely commercial system, statutory. And its courtrooms are statutory. Now here's the sad part. How in the world did the American people get so screwed up? The American people have screwed up by what I call consent. The Declaration of Independence says that governments are instituted by the consent of the governed. So you have 311 million people. 311. They, as of 1870, what did this group of people do? They created the 15th Amendment, which was the right to vote. But you had to register in order to participate in their system. Remember, there were two systems. Over here is the Republican form of government, Republican form, and that's on the soil of America. And over here, you have a private legislative democracy. Legislative democracy. This is System 2, System 1. When you register to vote, you have to claim citizenship to this, which is these guys. You have to claim it. You claim U.S. citizenship. You're no longer of the soil of America. You are now linked because you're saying you have an allegiance to these people. And this is where your rights are. This is where God's law exists. It disappears. So here you go. You consent by signing the voter's registration. Voter's registration. That ties you to this. Now, legally, not lawfully, legally, you're tied to all public policy that these guys can write. This guy gets to rule by executive order because it's just a company, and whatever he wants done happens through his private Department of Justice. In the state of, like state of Illinois, state of Wisconsin, state of Florida, state of Washington, in the state ofs, they have an attorney general that basically is enforcing this man's ideas. Because everything falls under the Department of Justice. There is no Article III judiciary in America anymore. Because 170 million people have chosen to consent to this system. 170 million. So if that's a majority of the 311, absolutely. This is a contract situation. Because they work by contract. Sadly, from that point forward, so this is U.S. citizen. Now you become a U.S. citizen. Here it is, United States citizen. And here's what happens. You're living under the UCC Commercial Code of the United States, and you're also, because the United States is upon the soil of the District of Columbia, you're living under Lex Fori. This is civil rights. This is UCC. You have tied yourself through consent, through your voter's registration, to this garbage. Now people always ask me, Curt, how in the heck, what is the answer to this mess? The only reason the United States has any granted authority over the American population is by consent. That's it. Consent. If we were to revoke our voter's registration and cut the ties, cut the claim, cut the consent to this form of government, I don't want to talk to people about the Republicans. I don't want to talk to people about the Democrats. I don't want to listen to all the great things about Ron Paul. They're all in this. Every Democrat, every Republican, Ron Paul, it doesn't matter. If you are participating in this legislative democracy, this is your system. You don't have the Republican form of government, it's over. You have no freedom. You only have the privileges offered by Lex Fori, and you're stuck with the statutory code of the legislative democracy from this private company. There is no way out, folks. You can't vote. You can't vote this away. You have to cut the ties. You have to revoke. Okay, you know what? I don't want to take too long. This is the answer. The answer to this cancer is to revoke the voter's registration. You need to cut this tie. So I'll write it over here. Number 1, revoke voter's registration. That's number 1. Oops, sorry. This is not perfect. So, how do we cut the ties to this? We have to give up this idea that U.S. citizenship is a good thing. These people, the United States is the world's murder machine. The United States private army, navy, air force, marines, and all that stuff, they're killing people on a global scale. Everything that's happening over above us, all the chemicals that are being sprayed and things like that, the fluoride in the water, them tying us by contract to the UN, us being stuck with codex, and all this other garbage that's going on, only affects U.S. citizens. It only affects U.S. citizens. It does not affect anybody else. So if you're a citizen of the United States, all of the garbage that's going wrong is going wrong because we consent to it. We need to withdraw our consent. So I'm going to write over here, withdraw consent. So how do we do that? Number one, we revoke our voter's registration. That's number one. And number two, and this is a tough one for people, because they're afraid they're going to lose everything. And then I'm done. This is it. This is a short one. Number two, number one. Number two, do not honor their contracts. And here's why. Their system, in order for a contract to be valid, there are three aspects to it. Number one, there has to be consent. Agreement. There has to be consent. That's one. Number two, there has to be full disclosure. You have to know what it is you're agreeing to. You have to know what it is you're consenting to. You have to know the whole story. I don't know anybody, if they knew this stuff, would choose to be a U.S. citizen. I don't know anybody. In fact, nobody would deal with this company if they knew it was just a company. You would not deal with Walmart if they were forcing you to do what this company's doing. So, there's three aspects. Number one is consent, which is agreement. Number two is full disclosure, which these guys don't do. You still think that you're going into a courtroom, but it's just a private system. It's not a court. It's not law. You wouldn't do that if you knew the full story. So, consent, full disclosure, and finally, there has to be consideration. Consideration means that there's skin in the game. Both of you have to have skin in the game. Let me just make one simple comment here. When you go in for a mortgage, does their system, does their banking system, does their private currency system have any skin in the game? No. They take your signature, your ability to earn in the future, and they amortize, or they monetize you, your signature, and then they loan you back yourself. They have no skin in the game. It's a fraudulent contract on its face. So, and what about citizenship? Is that a fraudulent contract? Absolutely. You don't know anything about these guys. The whole thing is a fraud. Their whole system is. In fact, they finance their entire works. They have their debt. The trillions and trillions and trillions we hear about all the time, it's their debt. It's not America's debt. It's not the American people's debt. It's the United States debt. The United States owes the world. But because all of the American people, or 170 million for sure, but the American people choose to be U.S. citizens, without full disclosure, of course, they take on the debt. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment says the public debt shall not be questioned. The U.S. citizen takes on the debt. So these guys keep writing checks by the trillions. And we lose, our children lose, and our grandchildren, and their children, and their children. And see, the thing is these pigs in D.C., these folks here, they have all the authority because we consent to this. They still think it's a contract because that's the way this system has been designed. So anyway, consent, full disclosure, and consideration. They have no consideration at all, no skin in the game. We're everything, we're every aspect. So we need to no longer honor their system. It's a dishonorable system. And so when I hear people say, Curt, if you don't do this, if you don't show up, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, you're going to be in dishonor. Are you kidding me? I would say that I would be in dishonor by honoring their dishonorable system. They're using our good nature against us. They know that when we sign something, we're going to try to follow through on it. They're using the best of us to enslave us. Two ways to take this beast down. Revoke the voter's registration. No longer hold this up as what most people believe to be a government. It's not a government. It's a private for-profit company. Revoke the voters' registration, number one. Number two, do not honor their contracts. They're all fraud. 100% of this situation is fraud. So when somebody says, Curt, what do we do? I say, withdraw our consent on every level. Withdraw our consent on every level. That's it. I'm done.